Charles Darwin spent most of his life asking questions that other people were too busy, too proud, or too distracted to ask. He studied evolution, natural selection, the origin of species, and the deep story of life on Earth. But when he came to the final book of his life, the last major work he would ever publish, he did not choose lions, whales, birds, or some rare creature from a faraway island. He chose earthworms. Not the kind of animal most people would stop to admire, not something you would put on a poster or brag about finding in your garden. Just the ordinary brown worms that twist through the soil after rain. The same worms you may have stepped over this morning without giving them a second thought. And yet Darwin believed these quiet creatures had shaped the world more than almost any animal alive. He believed that without them, farming would not work the way we know it. Gardens would struggle, forests would change, and the topsoil that feeds us would slowly disappear. At the time, many people thought that sounded ridiculous. How could a blind, soft-bodied worm matter more than horses, cattle, bees, or birds? How could something so small have anything to do with the history of agriculture? But more than a century later, modern soil science has shown that Darwin was not exaggerating. He was seeing something most people had missed. The truth is simple: if your soil has worms, it has life moving through it. If your soil has no worms, something important is missing, and the difference between those two conditions can decide whether your garden grows strong or slowly runs out of energy. But the most important part is this: you do not need to buy bags of fertilizer, you do not need to order worms online, and you do not need expensive equipment to bring them back. What you need is to build the kind of soil environment that worms cannot resist. That is the idea behind the worm magnet method, a simple 4-step way to turn tired, compacted, lifeless garden soil into dark, moist, living ground, using cardboard, mulch, organic scraps, and one habit most gardeners struggle to change. Before we get into the method, you need to understand why worms matter so much. Because once you see what they are doing underground, you will never look at your garden the same way again. For a long time, farmers did not see worms as helpers. They saw them as pests. Across Europe and early farming communities, people believed worms were damaging roots, stealing nutrients, disturbing seeds, and weakening the soil they had worked hard to prepare. Some farmers poured salt water into wormholes. Some crushed worms when they appeared after rain. Some thought a good clean field should be free of them, and the idea that a slimy little creature could be improving the land sounded almost laughable. Then in the late 1700s, a naturalist named Gilbert White suggested something different. He noticed that worms loosened the soil, that their castings seemed rich and fertile, that their movement changed the ground in useful ways, and he warned gardeners not to destroy them too quickly. Most people ignored him, but Darwin did not. Darwin read those ideas when he was young, and they stayed with him. While the rest of the world knew him for evolution, Darwin quietly kept studying worms for decades. He watched them, tested them, measured them, and asked questions about them with the same patience he brought to every great mystery. He kept worms in pots and containers. He observed how they pulled leaves into their burrows. He tested whether they responded to sound, light, and vibration. He measured the amount of soil they moved. And over time he became convinced that earthworms were not just living in the soil. They were making the soil. In 1881, just before the end of his life, Darwin published his book on worms, and in it he argued that these humble animals were responsible for forming and maintaining the top layer of earth that plants depend on. He estimated that worms in a single pasture could move many tons of soil every year, lifting it, mixing it, grinding it, enriching it, and leaving behind a better structure than before. That may sound like old science from another century, but today we know he was pointing in the right direction. Because earthworms are not just little animals crawling underground. They are soil engineers. When an earthworm moves through the ground, it eats a mixture of decaying leaves, dead roots, tiny organic particles, and mineral soil. Inside its body, that material is ground down, mixed with enzymes, blended with microbes, and transformed into worm castings. Those castings are not ordinary dirt. They are one of the best natural soil builders a gardener can have. Rich in plant-available nutrients, full of beneficial microorganisms, and structured in a way that improves water holding, root growth, and long-term fertility. Synthetic fertilizer can push a plant fast for a while. But worm castings feed the soil system slowly. They release nutrients over time. They support bacteria and fungi. And they help create the kind of living environment where roots can take what they need without being burned or shocked. This is why gardens with strong worm populations often look different. The soil is darker, softer, easier to dig with your hand, better at holding moisture, and less likely to turn into a hard crust after rain. But worms do more than make castings. They build tunnels, and those tunnels are like the hidden plumbing and air system of your garden. Some worms live near the surface, feeding on fallen leaves, straw, grass clippings, and kitchen scraps. They break big pieces of organic matter into smaller pieces and start the whole decomposition process. Other worms work through the topsoil, making horizontal tunnels that mix organic matter with mineral soil. They quietly blend the layers that plants use most. And then there are the deep burrowing nightcrawlers, the ones that build vertical tunnels running far down into the earth. They come up at night, grab leaves and organic debris, pull them underground, and leave behind channels that roots and water can follow. Those channels matter more than most gardeners realize. When rain falls on compacted bare soil, much of it runs off, carrying soil with it. But when rain falls on soil with worm tunnels, water can sink downward. It moves through those natural channels, reaches deeper roots, and stays available longer during dry weather. The tunnel walls are also lined with castings and mucus, which creates rich little pathways where plant roots often grow. If you have ever pulled up a plant and seen roots following old tunnels, that was not random. The roots were following the food and moisture the worms left behind. This is why worms are not just another helpful garden creature. They are the builders of an underground community, where worms thrive, bacteria multiply, fungi spread, protozoa feed, nutrients cycle, and roots grow deeper, stronger, and more resilient. When worms leave, that whole system starts to weaken. So why do so many backyard gardens have almost no worms at all? The sad answer is that many common gardening habits, even habits done with good intentions, make the soil hostile to worm life. Tilling is one of the biggest problems. Every time a rototiller tears through a garden bed, it cuts worms, breaks their tunnels, exposes moist soil to sun and air, and destroys months or years of underground structure in a single afternoon. A lot of gardeners till because they believe loose soil is always better. And for a short moment it may look soft and fluffy, but that looseness does not last. The soil collapses again, the biology is damaged, and the worms are forced to start over or leave. Chemical fertilizer can also create problems, especially when used heavily over time. Many synthetic nitrogen products are salty. They can change soil chemistry, irritate worm skin, and reduce the microbial life worms depend on. Remember, earthworms breathe through their skin. They need moisture around their bodies. And when that delicate skin is exposed to harsh salts or drying conditions, they either move away or die. Pesticides and herbicides can make the situation worse. Even products not designed to kill worms can damage the food web around them. Fungicides reduce the fungi and microbes involved in decomposition. Herbicides remove plants and weeds that would eventually become worm food. And insecticides can affect soil life far beyond the pest you are trying to control. Then there is bare soil, one of the most common sights in American gardens. Clean, exposed dirt between rows, under shrubs, around beds, and across vegetable patches. It may look tidy, but to a worm it is a desert. Bare soil heats up fast in the sun, dries out quickly after watering, forms a crust after rain, and offers almost no food or shelter. On a hot summer afternoon, the surface can become too harsh for worms to survive near the top. So they retreat deep underground or leave the area completely. If you want to know where your garden stands, do a simple test. Dig up about 1 cubic foot of soil from your garden bed. Place it on cardboard or a tarp, and count the worms you see. If you find 10 or more, your soil biology is probably in decent shape. If you find 5 to 10, your garden is struggling but recoverable. If you find fewer than 5 or none at all, your soil is telling you very clearly that worms do not feel welcome there. That does not mean your garden is hopeless. It means you need to change the invitation. And this is where most gardeners make a mistake. They think the solution is to buy worms and dump them into the bed. It sounds logical. If the soil has no worms, just add worms. But that usually fails because the problem was never only the absence of worms. The problem was the condition of the habitat. If the soil is hot, dry, compacted, low in organic matter, and regularly disturbed, the worms you buy will not stay. They will crawl away, tunnel downward, die, or migrate to a neighbor's mulch bed where life is easier. You cannot force worms to live in bad soil, but you can change bad soil into a place they naturally want to enter. That is the worm magnet method. You are not importing workers. You are building a home so attractive that the workers arrive on their own. The first step is the cardboard layer. Take plain brown corrugated cardboard from shipping boxes. Remove tape, plastic labels, staples, glossy sections, and anything coated or heavily printed. Then lay the cardboard directly over the soil you want to improve. Overlap the edges by several inches so weeds cannot easily push through the seams. Cover the whole area, then soak the cardboard thoroughly with water until it becomes heavy, soft, and pressed against the soil. This one layer does several things at the same time. It blocks sunlight so weeds weaken without spraying. It traps moisture against the ground. It creates a cool, dark surface environment. And as it begins to break down, it becomes food. Cardboard is mostly carbon-rich plant fiber, and decomposing cellulose is something worms are naturally drawn toward. It is like putting a dinner bell under your mulch, especially when the soil around it has been dry, bare, or hungry for organic matter. The second step is the mulch blanket. Over the wet cardboard, spread a thick layer of organic mulch, straw, shredded leaves, aged wood chips, grass clippings mixed with dry leaves, or a combination of whatever clean organic material you have available. Make it deep enough to matter. About 4 to 6 inches is a good target, because a thin dusting will not protect the soil. You want a real blanket. This mulch does what a forest floor does. It keeps the soil cooler in hot weather, slows evaporation, softens the impact of rain, prevents crusting, and provides a steady supply of decomposing material for worms and microbes. Under that mulch, the cardboard stays damp longer, fungi begin to spread, bacteria multiply, and worms start moving in from the surrounding soil because the area now offers food, moisture, darkness, and protection. Some gardeners call this a worm sandwich. Cardboard below, mulch above, and the worms gathering between them to feed, tunnel, and leave castings right where your plants need them. After a few weeks, if you lift the mulch and gently peel back a soft piece of cardboard, you may see dark crumbly trails, tiny pellets of castings, and worms working along the surface that used to be lifeless. The third step is feeding the system. Cardboard and mulch provide carbon, but worms also respond strongly to nitrogen-rich organic matter. This is where compost, aged manure, coffee grounds, vegetable scraps, banana peels, melon rinds, and crushed eggshells can help speed everything up. You do not need to dump food waste everywhere. In fact, that can create pests and smells. The better way is to create small feeding stations. Choose a few spots in the bed, lift the mulch, place a small handful of scraps or coffee grounds on top of the soft cardboard or soil surface. Then cover it back up with mulch. Within days, worms will usually find those pockets and begin concentrating their activity there. Over time, you can rotate the feeding stations across the bed, building rich patches of castings in different areas. And slowly the whole bed becomes darker, softer, and more alive. Crushed eggshells are especially useful because they provide grit and calcium. Worms use grit in their digestive system to help grind food, and calcium supports reproduction, so eggshells are a small addition that can make the habitat even better. But be careful about what you feed. Avoid large amounts of citrus peel and onions because strong acids and compounds can repel worms. Avoid meat, dairy, greasy food, and cooked leftovers because they attract rodents and create odor problems. And never add plant material that was treated with herbicides. The fourth step is the hardest one. Stop disturbing the soil. No rototilling, no flipping the bed over every spring, no digging just because that is how it has always been done. Once the worms begin building tunnels, your job is to let that underground architecture stay in place. Think of those tunnels like a natural irrigation system, a ventilation system, and a root highway all at once. When you till, you tear it apart, and the worms have to rebuild from zero. In a no-till bed, the tunnels improve with age. Water enters faster, roots grow deeper, air reaches the root zone more easily, and organic matter is pulled downward naturally instead of being forced down with machinery. When you need to plant, simply pull back the mulch. Cut through any remaining cardboard where necessary. Open a small planting hole. Place your seed or transplant. Water it in, and move the mulch back around the plant without burying the stem. The worms will keep working beside the roots, and the soil will keep improving through the season. There is one more practice that makes this whole method stronger. Keep living roots in the soil as much of the year as possible. After summer crops finish, do not leave the bed naked all winter. Plant a cover crop such as clover, oats, peas, rye, or vetch, because living roots feed soil microbes through natural root exudates, and those microbes help support the worm population. When spring comes, you can cut the cover crop at the base and lay it down as mulch. The worms will pull that dead plant material underground, convert it into castings, and continue the cycle. Now let's talk about what you should expect. Because this is not magic. It is biology, and biology has a rhythm. In the first 2 to 4 weeks, you may begin seeing a few worms under the cardboard on damp mornings. The soil will stay cooler and wetter, weeds underneath will weaken, and the surface will begin to smell less dusty and more earthy. By the 2nd or 3rd month, the soil under the cardboard may look darker, it may feel softer, and you may notice that a shovel or your fingers enter it more easily than before. That darker color is organic matter being processed into the upper soil. And that softer texture is the beginning of structure returning. By 4 to 6 months, much of the cardboard may be partly consumed. Fungi may have threaded through it, and small mounds of worm castings may appear where the soil surface used to be hard and pale. By the end of the first year, if you continue feeding with mulch and organic matter while avoiding tilling and harsh chemicals, you can have a self-sustaining worm population that breeds, spreads, and improves the soil without you buying another thing. And this is the part that matters for every gardener over 40 who has worked the same yard for years and wondered why the soil seems tired. You do not need to fight the ground harder. You need to bring life back into it. Worm-rich soil holds water better, grows stronger roots, cycles nutrients more steadily, stores more carbon, and becomes easier to work every season. The goal is not just to have more worms for the sake of worms. The goal is to create a garden where plants are supported by a living underground system instead of being kept alive only by bags, bottles, and constant correction. Darwin saw this before almost anyone else. He understood that the lowliest creature in the garden could be one of the most powerful forces in the landscape. He watched worms move one grain of soil at a time, one casting at a time, one tunnel at a time. And he realized they were doing work that human hands could never fully replace. So the next time you see an earthworm on the sidewalk after rain, do not look at it as something ugly or useless. Look at it as a sign of what healthy soil is trying to become. And if your garden has none, do not blame the worms. Invite them back. Lay down the cardboard, cover it with mulch, feed the soil gently, stop tearing the ground apart, and give the underground workers a reason to return. Because when the worms come back, the soil begins to breathe again. And when the soil begins to breathe, the garden begins to change. If this changed the way you look at your own backyard, then stay with this channel. Because we are going to keep uncovering the forgotten methods that older gardeners knew, scientists proved, and modern gardening somehow left behind. The next time we meet, we will go deeper into living soil, cover crops, and the simple seasonal habits that can make your garden richer every year without depending on more fertilizer. For now, start with one bed, one layer of cardboard, one blanket of mulch, and one decision to stop disturbing the soil. Then wait for the workers to arrive.